This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha. I'm back at you this week with another great story, and you can see the title on your screen. Caught my ex-wife in bed with her brother-in-law. Now they're begging me not to tell. Well, this sounds like a real family affair, if you know what I mean, so let's get right into it and see what it's all about. He starts off and he says, my ex-wife and I were married for just under 22 years when we divorced 4 years ago. I'll be referring to her as Terry here. The divorce was amicable, as ours was a situation where we slowly grew apart over the years and evolved into different people. We have 3 kids, 2 in college, and our youngest is in the 10th grade. Our post-marriage relationship has been very healthy, and we remain close friends and have mutual respect for one another. My wife still lives in our family home with our daughter. Each of our kids have their own rooms at both of our houses and come and go as they please. I'd say it was as close to an ideal situation for a divorced family, if there is such a thing. For the past 2 years, I've been in an exclusive relationship with a woman. She's divorced and has 2 kids in high school. We get along really well, but neither of us see the need to get married or cohabitate at this stage in our lives. Well, that's probably pretty smart on both of your parts. We enjoy each other's company and see each other several times a week depending on our schedules. Terry, my ex-wife, has not dated anyone since our divorce and doesn't go out much outside of work, church, and shopping. She's a great mother and spends a lot of time doing things for our 3 kids. Even though we're divorced, I still have a house key and the garage password for my ex's house. I take care of minor upkeep on the house and basic maintenance on her vehicle. I pretty much come and go as needed and tend to be doing something over there a couple times a month. Well, that's a little different, isn't it? He's divorced from his wife, but he still has a key to her house. Most recently, Terry told me the hot water in the master shower stopped working and only cold water was coming out. She said she had been using the guest bath and wanted to see if I could fix it. I told her the faucet probably just needed a new cartridge and I'd pick one up and install it the next time I was over. On the afternoon in question, I had a doctor's appointment at noon and decided to take the rest of the afternoon off to run some errands. I finished up with what I had to do by 2:30, so I swung by the store to pick up the cartridge and install it before she came home from work. When I got to the house, I entered through the back door and headed up the stairs with the cartridge and several tools in my hands. It was quiet and the house was dark. I walked up the steps and into the master suite to access the master bath, and there I saw Terry and her brother-in-law, who I'll call Greg, having X on the bed. Let me just say there was no doubt what they were doing. So could you imagine walking in on that? Terry noticed me first and screamed my name, then Greg turned to look and jumped back off of her. This all happened so fast I wasn't able to fully process it. I said something like, "Oh wow," then turned and scurried out of the house as fast as I could. Initially I just felt embarrassed, but then I realized what I just witnessed. My ex-wife was sleeping with her sister's husband. Oh boy. A few minutes later, Terry called and apologized to me for what I walked into. She said she knew what I saw looked really bad, but she could explain it. Oh, come on, Terry. I told her she didn't owe me an explanation since we're divorced, but she owes one to her sister, who I'll be referring to as Kathy. Kathy is a sweet person, and being the older sister, she and my ex have been very close their entire lives. Over the years, I had become good friends with Kathy and Greg. We did a lot together with our families when Terry and I were married, and we've all remained close after the divorce. Well, old Greg and Terry remained very close. He says that's why this situation is so disturbing. Terry told me she can't tell Kathy because it would break her heart and destroy their family. She said she and Greg understand what they did was wrong, and they won't ever do it again. She continued saying this was the first and only time they were together, yeah, sure it was, and that they'd like to forget it and move on like it never happened. Well, I'm sure they would. I didn't say anything, but I highly doubted it was their first time, as they were doing something you normally don't do the first time you're having X with someone. At least I never have. Well, it sounds like maybe the brother-in-law might have entered through the back door as well, if you know what I mean. I let Terry say what she had to say, then told her I needed time to think through everything because I still haven't processed what I saw. After this, I went home to decompress, then decided to go watch my daughter's soccer practice. While there, Greg called me and we talked briefly. Like Terry, he begged me not to tell Kathy and said this was all one big mistake. As I did with Terry, I let him say what he had to say but didn't make any promises. Later that evening, my Terry called and asked if she and Greg could meet with me tomorrow. There was desperation in her voice, so I agreed to meet with them after work the following day at a local coffee shop. We found a quiet spot and I listened to what they had to say. They basically repeated what they had told me over the phone and begged me not to tell Kathy. They promised to never do it again, and Terry told me this was all her fault because she was vulnerable and let it happen. She said she didn't want to break her sister's heart and break up their family. She said what she and Greg did was just a stupid sin of the flesh, and they both understand that now. But they didn't understand it while they were doing it. I told them neither of them owes me anything. They are two consenting adults and can do whatever they want, but I, however, have a moral obligation to let Kathy know if they don't tell her. I explained I wouldn't be willing to keep such a secret, and if I did, I'd be an accessory to the affair, which I was not willing to do. Absolutely not. Why would you cover for them? After hearing this, they both became desperate and Terry started crying, which of course you expected that, which then made Greg start to cry. So this Greg is some little you know what. I told them I understand how they are feeling, but they also need to consider Kathy and her feelings and dignity. I stayed with them for a few more minutes, then got up and left them there to discuss the situation. That conversation happened last evening, and this morning I'm kind of getting second thoughts. While I firmly believe Kathy deserves to know, telling her is probably going to end her marriage and her relationship with Terry. Then I thought about their kids and our kids and how it was going to impact them and started getting second thoughts. I'm not comfortable discussing this with anyone at this point, but would like to see what others think. So I'd appreciate any suggestions that anyone reading this would like to share. And that's the end of his original post. And next we're going to take a look at a few comments and then he comes back with a final update. But before we do that, I want to remind you, if you like what you've heard so far, be sure to hit that like button. That will help out the channel tremendously and also help get this video seen by people all over the world. Now, let's go on and take a look at those comments. Okay, the first one is from a woman. She says, "Why do you still have a key to your ex's house? I'd never think of just walking into my ex's house like that. What people do in their own homes is their business. Yes, what they were doing was wrong and terrible, but you shouldn't have been there. If I were you, I'd keep my mouth shut and give that house key back to your ex." Well, on this, I agree with this woman that he shouldn't have a house key and be going in and out of his ex-wife's house, even though she lets him do that. I just think that's weird. But because he did witness this affair, I think he owes it to Kathy, being her friend, to disclose this to her because she deserves to know. The next response is from a guy. He says, "This is a tough situation, but if it were me, I'd have to tell Kathy what I saw. It's definitely going to change everything, but in my book, honesty is always the best policy. If you keep this secret and Kathy later finds out you knew, she'll never trust you again and it will likely end your friendship even though your intentions were sincere." And the final response is from a woman. She says, "If I were in Kathy's shoes, I'd want to know. If you were my friend and didn't tell me and I found out, I'd cut you out of my life." So here's another one saying the same thing. Terry and Greg are obviously scummy people. Why would you even consider running cover for them about this? Absolutely. Also, this wasn't their first time. Cheaters always say this when they get caught. Isn't that the truth? How many of these stories have we gone through where the cheater gets caught and that's the first thing out of their mouth? "Oh, this was our first time." Or, "Oh, it only happened once." Nah, it's very rare that you're going to catch them on the first go round. So that's a look at some comments, and now he comes back with a final update 3 months later, nearly 3 months later. He says, I'd first like to thank everyone who read my original post and gave suggestions. I read each one and they helped me confirm I was doing the right thing. If you didn't read my original post, I'd suggest you do that before reading this update so it makes sense. After many excuses and a lot of foot dragging, Terry and Greg eventually did end up confessing to Kathy. They did it together, and from what I was told, things got very emotional with many tears and lots of anger. As a result, Kathy and Greg are now separated and she has filed for divorce. Well, you can't blame her. I think she's doing the right thing. As for Terry, Kathy no longer speaks to her, and their parents are very upset with Terry and Greg, as are our children and their children. The fallout has been on a nuclear level, and I've second guessed my decision many times, but recently information has been revealed that convinced me I did the right thing. Now listen to this. A week ago Thursday, I got a call from Kathy, and she told me she needed to show me something. We arranged to meet at my house, and she came over that evening after fixing dinner for her kids. We sat down, and she pulled out several pages of handwritten notes from a folder she was holding. She handed me the papers and said it was a full confession from Greg. She then told me to read it, specifically the section she had highlighted. According to Kathy, she told Greg if there was any chance of saving their marriage, he would have to tell her everything. So he wrote out this timeline. When I read it, I got the shock of my life. According to Greg, his affair with Terry started 3 years into his marriage with Kathy, which was about a year before Terry and I got married. This meant Terry had slept with him while we were engaged. So they've been fooling around for years. According to him, they stopped the affair when Terry and I got married, but they had several encounters over the years during the time we were married. Now, he's admitting to several. He probably should have said we had several hundred, because that's probably more like it. Greg stated he and Terry started their most recent affair a few months ago after he dropped off a chest of drawers that Kathy had refinished for her. So her sister refinished a chest of drawers for her, and her husband drops it off, and then her sister ends up sleeping with her husband. Oh my goodness. He carried it up to her bedroom, and one thing led to another, and they ended up sleeping together. All I can say is, wow, I would have never dreamed something like this would ever happen. Kathy and I talked for the next 3 hours about what fools we were. She never noticed any clues over the years, and neither did I, even though this was all happening right under our noses. Kathy told me after this revelation there was no way in hell she'd ever stay married to Greg, and has completely cut Terry out of her life. Yeah, I don't think there's any way to save that marriage, knowing your husband and your sister have been fooling around for years. And as far as your sister goes, that relationship is not salvageable either. The OP says, I've also stopped going over to Terry's house and only speak to her if it's something pertaining to our kids. I spoke to Greg last night by phone and he apologized. After he finished, I told him if we ever bump into each other, I'd suggest he turns and runs away as fast as he can, as I could not guarantee I'd be able to control myself. He asked if we could ever be friends again, and I told him there was no chance in hell that would ever happen. So that's the update. Other than that, everything is just peachy in my life. And that's the end of his story. Well, I think the OP is handling this the best he can. He's limiting his contact with his ex-wife. And if it were me, I'd really limit contact with her and only deal with her when I absolutely had to. And he's also cutting this Greg out of his life. He's no longer going to be friends with him. How could you be after what he did to you? And as far as this Kathy goes, I think she's handling it well too. She's divorcing this Greg who had been sleeping with her sister for years behind her back, and she's cutting her sister out of her life, which, again, you can't blame her for that. Why would you even think about having anything to do with someone like that? You could never trust them. So those are my thoughts, and now I want to take a look at what I think are the morals of this story. The first one, infidelity is rarely caught the first time. Like I said before, it seems like these cheaters say that oftentimes when they get caught. That's very rare. What are the chances of you catching them the first time around? It probably was their 10th time, 20th time, 30th time, who knows how many times, but I doubt it was their first time. Next. Cheaters are professional liars and should never be trusted. And that's why I think this OP and this Kathy are handling this situation the right way. Because you either want to be able to cut those people out of your life, or if it's a situation where you've got kids, you need to limit the contact with them to situations that are just pertaining to your kids and nothing more. Next. It's best to cut toxic people out of your life, what I was just saying. They will only cause you unnecessary mental anguish. When you maintain relationships with toxic people, it puts a real stress on your body, on your mind, and they're not worth it. So my advice is if you have toxic people in your life, either cut them out of your life or greatly limit the contact you have with them. Next. Achieving a level of indifference is the key to setting the betrayed partner free. And that's especially going to be the case for this Kathy because, she's still married to this Greg. She's going to be divorcing him. And once she gets to a level of indifference, that's going to give her back the power that he and her sister have taken away from her. And the same thing goes with the OP, but in the OP's case, he's already divorced from his ex-wife. So he's already separated there. Now what he needs to do is just limit his contact with her, which he said that's what he's going to do. And finally, moving on and living a great life is the ultimate revenge. And that goes for any relationship that has gone sour. Once you move on and you start living a great life and going on with your life, that's the best revenge to get on that person that did you wrong. So those are my thoughts. And now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story and how do you think these people handled the situation? Would you have done what they did or would you have done something totally different? Tell us about it in the comments. Also be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. And also, if you are on X, formerly known as Twitter, I'm on there now and I'm starting to post more. So be sure to follow me on X. And I will talk to you on the next one.